Hello and welcome to Ideas with Diana on February 15th, 2022. For today's podcast, I'd like to discuss a few ideas. One is my Kanecki Prolog project that I've been working on for the last year and a half, and they've added to my knowledge library. My knowledge library is a project that I'm doing to preserve knowledge in computer science, pre-med, and medical science, as I was a medical researcher in addition to being a computer scientist, in hopes that basically that this knowledge will be available to help future generations so that they can learn computer science and medical science as I did. The reason why I'm doing the knowledge library is because I'm concerned about how teaching is done at universities and schools, and feel that it's important to have certain types of common reference textbooks that allow a continuity between different groups of people in different age groups so that we can all communicate with each other and not have competing different languages that make a barrier that we can't talk. So to provide a bridge and to provide a land pathway of knowledge so that we can share information, we can understand, well, why did someone do the coding this, or why did some medical research think this way? And that's part of the coding project. Um, before so for the first topic, what I like to do is basically talk about what I've been doing with my Kanecki Prolog. My Kanecki Prolog was originally developed in 1986 as a way to see what I could do to aid the fifth generation project. It's reason why I call it Kanecki Prolog because it's not really true to the form of Prolog that was developed by Colmer at the University of Marseille and others at the University of Edinburgh. It has some distinct additions to it. And part of the additions to it was at the time, though, was I felt that I wanted to examine some ideas in set theory. And there weren't any set theory programs around for me to work with. So like I usually do, if after a search I can't find anything, or even if I can find something, I like to challenge. I made my own program, and I used the idea of Prolog, but I used a set theory notation internal structure to allow to basically find things and link things better. One of the best examples I did do is as a test, I actually was able to obtain data, epitope data from a database and see. I wanted to make a map saying, well, okay, if you start with this epitope, what's the tree going to look like? Like this, maybe like this, go all the way across. Well, when you use most programs couldn't even do that. And also I wanted to make it as a simple thing. I wanted the epitope data be put in as a list. Epitope A, epitope B, epitope A, epitope B, and then basically have the computer combine it together and make this list. And that was Kanecki Prolog. Also, with Kanecki Prolog was in part of an artificial intelligence class. I used it to make an organizational biology problem solver. So it could tell you what type of genus was the species that you're looking at, or even if it was a species. And what I get, again, using the set notation, it made it very easy to write the expert system. Well, now what I did when I wanted to do with my Kanecki Prolog is basically actually make another thing I want to apply the stack idea, the stack processor idea to AI. So basically, instead of just having a list, what you do is you have a list and you have a stack. So what happens, the list and the stack can interact with each other. And the purpose for this is to make it that you can actually do more than what you can do in traditional Prolog, as well as with the stack processing. It allows you to update the list, delete the list. It actually makes it a very viable addition to machine learning business intelligence, which I did using neural networks early on, and as well as developing intelligent thinking systems. So the goal of this is basically is to make the next level of intelligent thinking systems along that implements machine intelligence to a greater level than what it is used now. I'll keep you updated with various projects, and I may make a demo available. Which if I do make a demo, I'll put it under my account, Diana1Key at SourceForge. Now, for the second part of the discussion, I'd like to talk about some books I added to my library. I was watching a video on Netflix, and it's called The Art of Loving, and I was interested in the author. Now, this is an English translation of a book that was originally written in Polish, and it's a practical guide to marital bliss. And what I find what's interesting about that is the author is a pre-contemporary to Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina Chronicles and also Our Father's Daughters, which is the transgender experience of the Vagina Chronicles, which was later produced by MTV. I saw the second one. I haven't been able to see a performance of the Vagina Chronicles, but I'm looking to do so. The thing is with the book, though, it's very interesting when you read through the book, because basically, what you have to remember about the book, A Practical Guide to Marital Bliss, is that this was written by a doctor who lived in Poland during the time of the Cold War, and basically she was trying to get the book published in Poland to help couples understand how to be better couples, and in the movie it mentions about all the things she went through, about how the Ministry of Culture tried to sidewind her, tried to block her, and finally what happened was basically she finally was able to get this book published. And when the book was published, what happens? They only agreed to publish 10 million copies because they want to get the impression, well, this is just a fringe book and no one's going to buy it and stuff. And well, what happened was when it was published, other publishers outside of the Iron Curtain, including Western Europe, United States, bought it, and it became an international bestseller. And the reason why it became an international bestseller is because when you look at some of the topics, for example, one is it starts from childhood to adolescence, a youthful love, the senses, first steps together, how ecstasy and marital bliss are born, the orgasm, monotony, the enemy of love, and methods of preventing pregnancy. In 9, pregnancy and sex. 10, and they live happily ever after. The thing is, when I watched this series, I was very thought about how it also went into her life, about how basically some of this is she learned basically through her experience and others through her medical training. But even as a medical training, though, she still had to stay within these barriers to get the book published. And when she finally did, a lot of the barriers that existed back then as to sexuality and expression broke away. And so, like I said, this was a contemporary event. So the book was originally published in 1978, with the international editions published in 1990 and years later. The thing about it is the reason why I'm adding it to my knowledge library, because in addition to technology, it is important to understand psychology and intimacy, because as someone who worked in computers and part of the computer revolution, it's not just a matter of being a nerd or the computers are not enough. You need to have people that you associate with. You need to have people that you don't. It's not, and it's different from associating people you work with. Like basically, if you're going to go associate someone and someone from work, and you're just going to talk shop all the time, well, why'd you leave work? This is more about basically associating people that don't work in the same field you do. You're there to associate on the human condition, to sort of share things like I go to a sports bar with friends, and tomorrow we're going to go visit my alma mater, Parkside. What I'm hoping to do tomorrow is talk with our 2 people that ran the former radio station and discuss a new podcasting idea, and also to show my 2 friends what the campus is, because one of my friends hasn't seen the campus, especially the mural that was done listing a lot of the early professors at Parkside. And she's an artist, so she said, "God, that's wonderful. I love to see this." Now going on, the second book that I added to my knowledge collection is called Biological Modeling and Simulation: A Survey of Practical Models, Algorithms, and Numerical Methods. You can see the stranded DNA, um, the Markov chart, and it's this page two here. We'll open see. Let's give you an example of something here. Let's see. Where can I find? Let's see. Close. Oh, there we go. Well, this may look a little bit amazing, but what it is, it's actually on a chapter of basically cellular development and modeling cellular systems. Because when you model cellular systems, a cell is not exactly like a program. It's not like boom, 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 boom. It's actually more like a program that basically actually is a program. Boom, maybe like this, maybe like this, back again, like this, like this. And so there's different decision trees, if then, go-tos, branches, while loops. And this book goes into basically how to apply this idea of computer science into making modeling simulations. And this was something that I did early on as a freshman, because one of our experiments was basically determining Avogadro's number in physical chemistry. And so in physical chemistry, what you do is you take a column, you boil water, and then based upon the head and based upon the length of the column, you can determine Avogadro's number, which is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Another thing, what I did in my paper, which was different, is because I had advanced mathematics and calculus at the time. I also did a differential analysis of the system, of the time system domain that we used, and I submitted that along with my lab report. And I remember Professor Knight basically being very impressed with that, and he said, actually, that's a master's level report. He said, please make sure you hold on to this, and so that, because this shows that you have a lot of capability, and also did help the field. Now, when I did simulation, a lot of times what I did is I had to start from first principles. I didn't have a book like this. I had to start from first principles. So it meant using books on thermodynamics, organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, to work on the principles and work on the simulation systems. Now, what I'm glad about this book is that basically it actually allows you to move, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that's why that was added to my knowledge library. Now, second book I have, which is basically part of a set. I'm waiting for the first volume to come, but this is Intellectual Property in the New Technological Age, and talks about copyrights, trademarks, patents, and state IP protections. Now, the reason for this book is simply that for many people who work in software development, and even if you're going to work in software, you're going to be developing a new creative process. Two companies I recommend, Nolo, and this company. And this company is, let me go, is Clause 8 Publishing. And the reason why I recommend both companies is because both of them explain various aspects of the law as far as copyright, patents, trademarks, in easy to understand terms, so you don't have to be a law student to understand this. But as a developer, you can understand this and then talk with someone who is an attorney to help you do the final stages of filing the paperwork, or even you can start to file some of the paperwork of the copyrights. Patent paperwork, you can start there too. However, when you get into to a full utility patent, in that sometimes the process can be a little bit tricky because it's more paperwork. Also, the other thing is you got to be able to explain it in certain terms that basically a patent inspector will accept, along with paying the various fees. because a patent nowadays can cost about $45,000. A copyright, I think, is now $45 in the United States, and a trademark, I think, is about $350 in the United States. Now, with the Novel Book and Causey Publishing, they allow you to understand some things that can happen. When you make a product or software, you never think about what's going to happen. Well, what happens if I make this software and I sell it, and it's like a database software, it has all these things to make it where you can find references and find things, and someone says, well, okay, well, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to resell it as a service. They're not going to tell you that they're reselling as a service. You suddenly discover that they're reselling as a service, and they only bought one copy of software for you, but they're reselling as a service for $15 a month. Well, in this book, because it mentioned this, and this was actually a case that occurred in Wisconsin. And what I found out, what was interesting, which I always wondered why software development, it's in Wisconsin, it's easy to develop software and IP because of the university system and the library system we have, and the creative community we have. However, it's a different kettle of fish to sell it, because what happens is, as this example I mentioned to you, Wisconsin considers a shrink wrap contract. Let me start again. Wisconsin considers a shrink wrap agreement as a contract. Well, what does that mean? Well, even if you were to have a shrink wrap agreement, let's say you have a software box, and you put the shrink wrap agreement all on here like this. Basically, this program is provided as is. You can't copy. You're allowed to use it for your own use, and in a domicile such and such. Okay, well, in Wisconsin, that's considered a contract. But however, since even if the agreement, a shrink wrap agreement, is outside the box, what happens, because it's not signed between two parties and witnessed, it's considered unenforceable, and this was a case that was mentioned in this book about that happened around the mid 90s. Maybe the situation has changed. I need to see about in the latest book that I'm waiting to come, that's based on 2022. But it did remind me in the 90s why software was such a wild west thing in Wisconsin, and even through the early 2000s. And again, the reason why I buy this is because even though I develop software and I develop various biomedical processes, it's good to understand this and be able to read this without having to always pay it a $750 retainer to talk with an attorney who may or may not be familiar. And I also have Legal Shield, and Legal Shield can do this research to me. And also that's why as an friend, it's good to have Legal Shield, because by reading this, you can, when you talk with someone at Legal Shield, or you could say, well, look, I studied this, and now can you sort of check for me to see if this is still valid? And the attorneys at Legal Shield can do the legal research and tell you, and as part of your monthly plan, they can say, yeah, well, this is valid. Also, they can tell you what type of contract do you need to make sure that your product is protected when you sell it, so someone can't reuse it from underneath you. And that's why it's important to have this type of reference in the library. Now, another book that I bought, goes back to when I was in pre-med. I had Human Physiology by Stuart Fox. I actually had earlier edition. This is the, I think, 15th edition. Let me see. And that this is 13th edition, and this is a picture of the author at the time of this. Now, the thing about with this edition, though, the reason why I like to add this is because in pre-med, this is very helpful for me to understand certain things. For example, different diagrams about how things work. Here we go. Also, a diagram biochemical diagram and charts to understand how the glands work. And the other thing that he included is, let's see if I can just find a good example here. Let's see. Well, this is one of the examples. This is a flow chart depending on what action occurs, what other actions can occur. So it helps you understand physiology from like an if-then point of view. Let's see. Whoops. I think they call it. Let's see. Just a minute. Let's see. Here we go. The other thing what it does is in this chart, it shows a mathematical basis as to how functioning works, a time basis as to how functioning works. Now, some people say, well, you really don't need that in a human physiology book. It's just a male anatomy. No, actually, for me, it's more than that, because I remember things differently than other people. I don't remember things by rote. Like, for example, if you were to say, well, okay, this bone is inferior to this bone. If you were to ask me a test just completely based on that, I would fail greatly, because I don't remember things by rote, but I do remember things by association. So, like if you would ask me a question regarding this and says, well, okay, this bone is inferior to this bone, but if I can think of the association between blood vessels and nerves, then I would pass the test with an ace. So what happens for me then to remember things, I need to think of associations of 2 or 3 things that associate to it, and that's why when I had physiology under Dr. Wallen at UW Parkside, he understood and taught not by low value, but he taught naturally by associative value, and this was the book they used to teach by associative learning. And that's how I was able to. That's why basically when I had Professor Wallen for anatomy, I had A+ anatomy. But when I had another professor who was a little bit out of touch, I think, and the Board of Regents agreed with me. He taught by low value, because basically that was how he was taught when he went to school in Canada. And I mean, nothing against the Canadians, but sometimes not everyone fits into the same mold, and a round peg does not fit into a circle. A square peg does not fit into a circle. So when he taught it, basically, everyone that took the course had trouble with it. And what happens, they would form study groups to pass the course. I wasn't part of a study group, because basically I had other classes, and also sometimes, since I was 2 years older than my pre-med class, the sometimes were mishmashes because I couldn't stand the immaturity. So basically, when I had the class, I studied by myself. But the thing is, with this whole thing, even other people had failed at this whole thing, and they really didn't understand in the end. They could understand it once they started working, or they were working in a non-management, non-leadership task. But I was trained. I did my internship in an emergency room, and actually the associative learning is more what was needed in the emergency room, because we had to understand how one thing reacted to another. We just couldn't say, well, oh, okay, it's this bone, it's that bone. It's like, no, that wasn't enough. We had to know that basically, well, if you had, like, for example, if you came in with a medical emergency and what happened, this bone was affected, you could have a nerve in your hand affected, which would mean basically your hand could go like that. You could also have a blood vessel affected. And so we had to know basically multi-level, not just point to point. And So when I took human anatomy from another professor who taught as Dr. Wallen did, I passed with an A plus when I had training at Becton Dickinson. Now the last book another book I ordered is one on review of medical microbiology and immunology. Now, part of the reason why I ordered this book is when I went to Parkside in my senior year, I wasn't able to take microbiology at Parkside. I actually took it at the BD school in Boston. But when I did take it at Parkside, my pre-med professor was very angry at me. She said, "Well, how dare you? Don't you take my course? And you're not real." And what happened was, so when I took the course, we used a book similar to this. Also, the reason why I got this book is because in one part of this book, let's go through it. There's a certain term that was used, basically that was considered a new term when I started in medical research, known as apoptosis. And let's just say, I think it's almost there. Let's see. It's almost. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. 502 and 561. Okay. Well, the thing is, what happens, this chart again, it shows basically how normal cells go through death and how it goes through death with apoptosis, and how it is regulated through the bone marrow, and see, the other one is 525, and this is a case of basically where apoptosis can be affected by antibodies. Now, the reason why this is important to me, though, is because when I started out as a medical researcher, like many medical researchers, I started when I was 26, and by basically 27, I was contributing to research, writing research papers, presenting papers at research discussion group RDG. And when a group of us, when we started really to work on different things and regarding like the Human Genome Project and others, especially with the first Gulf War, the apoptosis near the period of 1992. What happened was we started to find information on apoptosis. However, at the time I was about 29, and well, to some of the researchers I worked with, including one who was actually 45, we were accused of drinking too much Coca-Cola, reading the long science journals, as we didn't fully like to get all of our information from the American Academy of Science. I was the one who was the oddball who always read Nature, bioscience from Oxford, and life science from Cambridge, as well as European journals from Germany, Italy, and at that time also from Russia that started to appear basically due to the end of the Cold War. And I was accused of saying, well, these research experiments are not done properly, and they really don't hold up in U.S. science. And I and others said, look, we knew how to do the experiments, and we could tell that they were, but it was a matter of scientific bias and country bias. And at that time, we were told, oh, apoptosis doesn't exist, just like the stem cell didn't exist, which is CD128. And so for many of us, basically, those journals helped us prove. But by getting this book today, this proves to me that basically I was right. And And during the time when I was a young medical researcher, because I didn't have my microbiology training at a university, I had it at a special um, a special course through BD. I always was beaten over the head over microbiology and virology. Now going through this book, I see that actually I knew more than most of the people did. And the reason I was being over the head was because basically they didn't want to admit that they didn't keep up the studies, they didn't keep up on the research. It's just like many people who are transgender now remember in the 90s, in many parts of the country, including Milwaukee, there are many doctors who still, even as late as of 1990, still use what's called DSM-1. Now, DSM-1 is basically the first book that by the American Psychological Association that's written to address, what is homosexuality, what is transgenderism, what is different types of identity expression. Now, in those days in DSM-1, all those things were considered that if someone had that, they had to be committed to a mental hospital. And a lot of doctors, as late as 90 and 91, still used DSM-1 when actually DSM-2 was out, which declassified it, making not a mental illness, but basically an illness due to genetics. But a lot of doctors didn't want to do that because they didn't want to give in to the thing about using genetics as a form of medical basis and diagnosis. And going on, there was DSM-4 that was published in 1994. A friend was able to get me a copy. And when you look at, again, what is considered homosexuality, what is considered transgender, what is gender dysphoria, what is gender identity disorder, all those are classified as non-deviant, non-psychological. So basically, a person could not be committed to a mental hospital for being homosexual, transgender, lesbian, or. But the thing is, it still took 2 updates of DSM-4 to get to what we call DSM-5, where basically it wasn't a case where you had to go through this rigorous punishing testing process to prove that you are transgendered. It was a case where basically, if you express yourself transgender, if you express yourself as a woman, you are a woman. If you express yourself as a man, you are a man. And what happened was it also avoided the need for what was called these ridiculous tests that they used to have people take, because many people were transgender during the 90s. Remember having to pay $250 to take these tests, which were rigged. And as mainly the reason why they wanted, because some professionals saw transgenderism as a gravy train, and they wanted to have these tests and have people go through session after session before they would actually approve them and have a name change and other things. And many people are transgender now basically by let me move these books again. Now, by many transgender people working with groups as the Center um, and other support groups that actually have read law books like this, they realize now they don't have to go through this whole humongous process that people had to go through all the way up to the mid 90s if you're transgender to live fully and live honestly. For example, like if you're transgender and you want to start living fully, you don't have to go to a doctor to live fully and get a psychiatrist to approve a name change. All you have to do is basically contact LegalZoom. LegalZoom has a form for name change. You tell them what state you live, what county you live. They pre-fill out the forms for you. Then what happens is basically you go before a judge, and the judge will ask you 2 questions. First, how long have you been living, under your true name rather than your dead name? That's question 1. And second, do you have people at regularly at work or social that recognize you under your new name? Yes. Approved. That's it. That's it. Then once you get the name changed approved, first thing you do is you go to Social Security, because you have to show them the paperwork that you had your name changed and your gender changed. Then then you have to give Social Security about 3 days to update the computer. Then you can go to the DMV and get your new license under your true identity name, and that's it. Now, in the past, before DSM-4 and DSM-5, you had to go through this big process and big process and big process and spend a lot of wasted money on therapy that you really didn't need. And what happens now? Now you don't have. But again, the reason why the process changed is because many support groups, just like many software developers learned, it pays to read the law. You don't have you shouldn't entirely depend on an attorney. You should also read the law for yourself so that you have a general idea on how to talk to an attorney. Even when I went for my MBA, I had equivalent 2 years of law school. I went for my MBA. The professor taught the class. He was a patent attorney, and everyone in the class was wondering, well, why do we have to read this book on patents? There's a different book, but there's a book on patents, patent law. Why do we have to read it? And it's like, look, I know some of you may not go on to become an attorney, however, but you need to understand this so that when you talk with an attorney, you have a bit of a background, and even you have a background so that when you work with people, you know how to watch yourself so you're not caught. For example, you know the difference between a sweetheart contract and a fair contract. You know the difference between term employment and at-will employment. Just to refresh, term employment is like a professional basketball player, football player. They sign up to play for a season or so many seasons with a certain team. Then when that contract's done, if the team wants them, they'll sign another contract. But what happens if during that term of the contract, if they're not performing well or something, then the team has the right to put them on waiver wire and trade them. Or even if the athlete's not satisfied with the team, then what happens for him or her to break the contract? Then basically there's normally a penalty involved, and also they have to allow the time for the team to find a replacement player for the position that they're leaving. Now, at will is what most people work at when you work for a company. You sign up for a company and you do things, and unless you have a union, then that's a special at term contract. But if you're working at a company that's not a union, you work there, and what happens if you work long enough, you retire. If the company goes to let's say a company has a thing where they have a shutdown or they have a downturn in the economy, and they say, well, you're doing a good job. I'm sorry, but we don't have the sales right now to keep you, so I'm going to have to put you on layoff. Well, then what happens is basically then you're let go, and or another thing is what happens if you have a company and you had a good manager, and then suddenly that manager's promoted and you get a bad manager and he's really a pill or she's really a pill. And what happens, they don't like you because you remember the old manager and how things were really done or something, or just basically they don't like you because basically you're too closely associated with the old manager. They'll try to fire you, and they'll say, well, you're fired. And that's at will means they can do that basically immediately with very little paperwork. And that's why when I had my MBA classes, that's why, and even before when my dad was alive, he would encourage me. He said, "You got to read these legal books," and he encouraged me. Like this came out. This is Clause A Publishing, which is a new company that came out a few years ago. But he had encouraged me to get the Noah books. Whenever we went to a bookstore, he said, "Well, also, did you get this Noah book on the web? Let me get one from my library to show you." This is the Noah book on web and software development. And back of it, protect your rights. Um, the legal rules governing website and software development and protection are complex and confusing, but if you don't untangle them, it could cost you thousands of dollars in attorney's fees and lawsuits. And what what the book goes on to say, part of the thing in the book is what kind of legal protection you need, the strength and limitations of each type of protection, how to avoid infringement, which provisions you need when drafting agreement, how to obtain permission to use other people's materials, and also step-by-step to employment agreements, contract and consultant agreements, development agreements, and license agreements. Um, and that's why in developing a library of knowledge, it's not enough to have books on algebra, calculus, inorganic chemistry, physiology. You also have to understand the legal part. And another part of my library knowledge is also the humanities. As I mentioned, another part is the humanities. And part of the thing with the humanities is this. This is based on a communication course. It's called In Mixed Company. And what the book is about is how do you communicate in small groups and teams? Because if you're just going to think that you're going to become a leader of your own executive of your own company, or basically something above a manager level in another company, just by knowing technology, say, well, you got to know the COP value. You got to know the melting point. Well, in CRISPR, you do it this way. That's all fine. What happens, that means you're an advanced technician and you can talk to other advanced technicians. But when you get into making a product, you got to learn to talk to more people other than technicians. It's not just, and you just can't say COP value, it's CRISPR. And that's what a lot of foreign researchers have when they first come to the United States. They think it's all technology. It's all these medical terms. They say, "Oh yeah, I know English." Well, not really. You know how to say things in medical terms. Well, we need to start a drip stat. Okay, but then when they go to McDonald's, they don't know how to speak English to order a hamburger. And that's the point. And that's why in mixed company, because when you move past to being a technician, whether medical, computer science, or other technological field, you got to learn how to talk to people. You got to learn to talk in natural language, and you got to learn to talk in language that's not jittery, that's not stop start, that's not sing song. You got to learn to talk in the language of the culture you are. It's like on Sliders one time, they had one character said, if you come to this country and you want to work, you got to learn the language. And he wasn't being mean. He was right, basically, because you got to learn to communicate. And the thing is, that's why in my library now I also have to, because sometimes in technology, people in technology don't take enough humanities courses. They don't take enough communications courses. They don't take enough history. They don't socialize enough. And what I mean by socialization, not socializing with your own group in pre-med or own group in computer science. I mean, actually going to a sports bar, socializing with people who are contractors, people basically who work on the road, people who work in the trades, socialize it. Because what happens sometimes in colleges, they teach, well, you're a pre-med, you're way up here. You're never going to have to associate with the little people down here, meaning the trades. Well, really, that's way out of date. That's been out of date since the end of World War II with upstairs, downstairs. The real world is this. We all work together. We all join hands together. And regarding whether you're a professional working the trades or and also if you work a gig job or full-time job, part-time job, any job, all of us have the same thing. Sometimes we need to get away and talk with people and outside of our own work group, because sometimes work is difficult and can be very hard. So but basically that's why with my library knowledge. That's why I've been correcting books, is because I feel it's important to keep a library knowledge, because I think disciplines now, the way they're taught universities, are too narrow-minded. They need to get back to a more broader liberal arts space. Well, let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter. So the best way to reach me is on Twitter at Diana1A. And also I'm on Facebook at Diana Kay dot 2017. But what I prefer you do is I prefer you contact me on Twitter, because I really don't like to use Messenger. I prefer just receiving messages on Twitter. So just contact me on Twitter at Diana1A. Well, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I should have another podcast shortly, maybe in about 2 weeks. I'll see you in about 2 weeks.